When I paint, I have an overall image in mind before I begin a composition. I envision it. The figures, symbols, textures, colors, and layout, how all of these different factors should relate in order to convey a concept, idea, feeling, or memory. I usually start with some kind of map, loosely placing components, developing colors, and dealing with proportions of objects and figures. Once this map has been created, the painting process starts. I never work with just one section of a composition, finishing it before moving on to the next. Instead, I am constantly jumping around, noticing that one part needs to be altered or created as soon as I change another, every section relating to the next, experimenting and balancing, mistakes, surprises, new ideas, old memories emerging, all welcomed and informing the next steps. I keep the idea that inspired me in mind the entire time I am painting, but always, when I finish, the composition is something quite different than what I originally imagined. The process informs the product. Envisioning the composition or the journey of my Judaism is an ongoing process, but something I'm constantly trying to imagine and relate to. I think about some of the textures, colors, symbols, and memories that are a part of the map. I imagine standing next to my mom, a spectacular artist herself, the smell of her challahs fresh out of the oven overwhelming our senses. We move our hands in 3 circular motions before we cover our eyes and say the blessing over the Shabbat candles. She taught me that the fire is always more beautiful after the blessing is said and our eyes reopen to the warmth of Shabbat. I imagine my Abba standing in a corner, tefillin affixed to his arm and forehead. If I catch him in the wee hours of the morning, he'll beckon me over, wrapping his talit around me as he offers his prayer. I remember my dutiful grandfathers, both teachers and scholars of their own right, the look of pride and hope I saw in their eyes when I would tell them about what I was learning in school. I think of my Baba's stories in evocative art pieces, sculptures, paintings, and drawings, vivid and metaphoric, making meaning in tying memories of our family's journey to her life in St. Louis, Missouri, to pinnacle moments of my own childhood experienced through her passionate and creative eyes. I think about growing up, spending hot summers in my grandparents' small apartment in Ramle, Israel, and I think of my savta's cooking. The taste of her Tunisian recipes exposed the collective pain and perseverance of a people displaced, spices and textures from around the world meeting, celebrating, and longing together in a single dish. Even when it's 100 degrees outside, my savta can be found chopping, grinding, kneading, and frying, always prepared to host, welcome, accommodate, and sustain. While the men in my family had voices elsewhere, like many religious Sephardic women, my savta finds power in the kitchen, praying through her cooking instead. Nurturing us with soup, she prays for the health of her family. Protecting us from harm and evil, she infuses her recipes with peppers, garlic, and unusual herbs, bringing us together. Marking time and making meaning, she cooks special dishes for commemoration as well as celebration, profoundly understanding exactly how other people need to be fed. I think of how holidays smell, the voices of children excited for dessert. I think of being welcomed. I think about Jerusalem, sometimes safe and sometimes less, the ancient, slippery stones that have been traveled so many times before. I walked them as a curious, hungry child, as a questioning teenager, and as an adult, in love, hand in hand with another wandering soul. I think about heartbreak and the meaning that Havdalah can bring to transition. Jerusalem is longing. I think about music, cramped, sweaty spaces and voices coming together, consuming, electrifying energy, catching eyes, Yedid Nefesh, lover of my soul, merciful God, holding breath, silence after song, harmony, joy, and sadness, all shared. I think of the Jews I've met across the world, stories and realities so different from mine, face to face when we sing the words of our shared tradition. I think about spirit, safety, and rebellion, sneaking off during services to play poker in a synagogue storage room, dancing, jumping, celebrating, arms wrapped around each other. And I think of sometimes being stopped, sometimes corrected and quieted, told to be modest, directed to be different. I think of language barriers, now and across time. I think about disconnect. I love the words, I am challenged by the words, and I'm inspired by the words. I dread the words of the Torah. And I know that other people dread that I, a woman, read them at all. I think about pain, the patient yet sorrowful eyes of a rabbi looking back at my face of grief. I think of the rhythm of the mourner's Kaddish, comforting, maddening, exalted, hallowed throughout the world which God has created according to God's will. I think of bewildering injustice and death, the losses and circumstances that make no sense, voices silenced, stories buried, systems that fail people, prayers unheard. I think about listening, and I wonder about the mystery, uncertainty, and blessing of rain. Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you who has kept us alive, sustaining us, and brought us to this season. Very often, I thank God, sometimes with fear, and sometimes with anxiety. I think of sanctuaries, with chickens out front in Ramle, a special chair for Elijah in India, and stained glass windows in New York City, enchanting music, the wise, gracious, and dignified rabbi dropping to his knees in front of the ark on Yom Kippur. I wonder why he does it, and remember that he is not the first. And more, and yet, and always, the painting isn't done. It's part of a much larger, hopefully eternal shared work, influencing and being influenced by creations that started long before and will continue far after. I wonder what new colors and figures will emerge, come together, and surprise. The process informs the product, and there's always more to render.